Yep, we can see it.
Oh, awesome. It's going to be a good Friday. Yay. Okay. So guys, today we get to talk about floodplain ordinances, regulations, and we're going to touch upon permitting just a little bit. And we're a little bit late getting started. There's a lot of material here, but we'll try to get through it as far as we can and as quickly as we can. So with this, let me see. Why doesn't it want to advance my slides? There we go. All right, so just remember that we're all working together on this. We're working with FEMA, our state programs, whether it be Utah or Montana, and then of course there's the local communities. And so today we're mostly going to be talking about you guys, the local communities, and what your roles are in administering the local floodplain programs. And the reason that you're doing this is to prevent this kind of, catastrophic flooding. Hopefully you can do some of this in how you manage the development of your communities, which is why we have these regulations. Okay, this is a super busy slide, and they would tell you too much information on the slide, all that kind of stuff. But look at the top of it. It says floodplain administrator duties. And I truly think it's okay for this slide to be busy. Don't you guys agree? Because look at all the stuff you guys have to do. You have to know your local floodplain. You have to be an expert. You have to know your maps. You have to know land use and planning. You got to be able to be nice to people, who are coming in asking for help and maybe arguing and being difficult. And you're going to have to maybe do some enforcement and make your cousins and your neighbors not like you. But you're going to try to do it all in the name of safety and trying to be a person who's trying to help, right? And then you got all these documents that you got to maintain. And if you even have a conversation with somebody, you should be sending an email saying, hey, Joe, thanks for talking to me today. I know we discussed getting that floodplain permit application before you build, documenting that kind of stuff. So you guys have a lot of stuff to do besides trying to know your regulations, process a floodplain permit, okay? So I just get all winded and nervous thinking about all the stuff that we do. And then, gosh forbid that you have a disaster, right? Because then that opens a whole new can of worms that Tracy and I have been dealing with for the past 2 years and trying to help our communities recover. So we're going to talk today mostly about floodplain regulations and permits and knowing your local ordinance. So one little thing that I just want to make sure, in addition to knowing this local ordinance and your model regulations, okay, is do you guys all have this quick guide? I hope that you do, because some of the material today is going to come from the quick guide. We have tried to get hard copies out to all our communities. So if you don't have one, maybe send me an email and I can get Amanda in our office to mail you one if we haven't got you a hard copy. But it's also downloadable from our website. And Tracy worked really hard a couple of years ago to put this together. Mackenzie, just out of curiosity, or Tom, do you guys have something similar to this in Utah?
Yeah, we do. We have a Utah quick guide. I actually have your guys' quick guide too.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know North Dakota is working on maybe trying to get one. They're just kind of handy. And I was flipping through my quick guide last night, prepping for this, and it's just amazing to me, some of the information that's in there. I'm like, oh, that would have been quick and easy to find when I was looking for it. So just don't forget that that is a useful, handy resource. Okay, so is your floodplain regulations. I can't tell you, as I was learning this program and coming into it, floodplain administrators would be coming in with a question, sending an email, calling, and I'm thinking to myself, how in the world will we ever answer that? How many days does a camper, is it allowed to stay? How do I know that? And Tracy'd be like, look at the ordinance, look at the community ordinance. And that's what you guys need to know too, is a lot of times those questions that you have about floodplain permits or that people ask you, it's truly answered in your ordinance. All our communities ordinance have different dates that they were adopted and passed. But what Tracy and I will be trying to do, and Anthony, the next couple of years, is we are going to try to update everyone to our 2024 state model ordinance. It reflects new changes to the federal regulations as well as some changes to state regulations. And we need to get all our communities updated. So I thought it'd be a good time to just say that and start introducing you guys to that. Why do we do regulations in the floodplain? Well, we're trying to protect people and property. We want to make sure that flood insurance could be available and hopefully affordable, because sometimes if people build out of compliance, it raises the cost of their flood insurance. We want to try to save tax dollars. If there's a disaster and a bunch of homes or businesses get damaged, or roads or bridges, because maybe they were improperly built, or they were built pre-firm before they had to follow some of the flood regulations, we can save some of this damage that they incur. And I truly think we saw this in our floods in June 2022. A lot of the homes that were damaged, I think, Tracy, wasn't our percentage that you looked at, didn't it say like 63% of the homes and businesses damaged?
65%.
Okay. They were built either pre-firm or they were built out of compliance with the regulations.
The 65 were pre-firm and 8% were built out of compliance.
There you go. There you go. So, the other reason why we have these lawsuits and liabilities is, or have regulations, is to avoid lawsuits and liabilities. If you're following your regulations and you're delivering those consistently, we talked about that last week with the takings. You can avoid lawsuits. So if we were to look at your model regulation or the model regulations in section 1.4, it gives a purpose for why we have the ordinances. And mostly that's to protect human life and health, minimize expenditures of public money, to control, minimize flood projects or flood control projects, minimize the need for rescue. We don't want our rescue workers and our emergency personnel to be at risk either when they've got to get people out of homes, or try to access properties. And then we want to minimize how long it takes for businesses and the public to recover. We want to minimize those service interruptions. If you guys recall, a couple of years ago, there was a big campaign about Gardner and Red Lodge, how they're gateways to the park. We even shut down the Yellowstone National Park because of those floods. That's why we got such response. They responded quickly. We got a presidential declaration in an unheard of time frame, but it was because they wanted to minimize these interruptions. So lots of times when we go into a community and we're doing a visit, and maybe Mackenzie, if you want to comment too, let us know. I'm sure none of the floodplain people in Utah are like a few of the people we have in Montana. When we go in and we're talking to them and we say, okay, where's your ordinance? They don't know where it is. So how many of you guys today sitting here, how many of you guys know where your ordinance is, knows where to find it, and you know what it says? Just ask yourself that. And You don't have to answer out loud. If you need help finding that ordinance or you need help getting a copy, reach out to Tracy and I, because I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. And I'm sorry to do this to you, Tracy, but you know how we all think Tracy is the guru and she knows everything, which she kind of does. But the reason she does is because she knows these ordinance and these regulations inside and out of the back of her hand. It's surprising to me when I'm working with her and she's like, oh, that community has a little bit different regulation. They do it a little bit differently. Go look and see. So that's why it's important. And that's why sometimes we can't give you an answer right away, because we're checking to see what your ordinance says, because each community has the flexibility to modify those regulations a little bit to their standards too. In order to participate in the NFIP, when your community joined a long time ago, you have to adopt a floodplain ordinance. And that ordinance must exceed or meet the federal regulations. Okay. And where these federal regulations are specified, well, it's our old friend, the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. And this time it's in Title 44, sections 59, and then our old friend, section 60, which you saw Gary kind of matching up some of the regulations to how it matched to the maps in section 60 in the beginning, if you got on early. Also, these regulations, they need to be applicable, and they're based off the level of detailed mapping that the community has. So what did I just say? I basically just said, if we're going to break that down, your floodplain ordinance is tied to your maps. And that's why when your community gets new maps or they get updated mapping, what do we have to do? You have to update your ordinance too. Okay. And again, that's specified in 44 CFR 60.3 that your maps and your regulations are linked together. Again, here it is. Your ordinance needs to meet or exceed the state and federal minimum standards. Must be updated when your maps change. Here's the key that a lot of our communities forget. They'll jump in and they'll be like, hey, I even went out to the DNRC website and I grabbed that 2024 draft model and I went through and I changed everything and I made it specific to our community. And then I even took it to the town council and we adopted it. And then Tracy says, wait a minute, you didn't have me look at it. And at the same time, FEMA needed to look at it. And it's kind of a bummer of a day when they look at it and then they find something that needed changed or something that wasn't done right. And we have had communities do that. So make sure you don't forget that step, that FEMA and the DNRC floodplain folks, or even in Utah, Mackenzie and Tracy Harrison need to look at your ordinance before you update it. It's just good practice to do that. And then when you're getting your community, have them follow whatever their procedures are for adopting regulations in the community. Usually there is a public notice process. Usually it involves a couple of readings and notices in the paper, and then they can adopt it. But it is a public process. Okay. Any questions so far? Because I am rocking and rolling, drinking my coffee. Okay. So again, we have a state model ordinance to help our communities. You can download it off the website, and there's our website. Tracy just updated it. She had to make a couple of changes even in January. They were minute changes. Just a little bit had to do with some prepositional, his, hers, theirs kind of thing. And she just updated that and put the latest and greatest draft model on there. The majority of the NFIP participating communities will have this model ordinance. Some of them, like Missoula, maybe they've adopted higher standards. Remember, Missoula regulates not to the 100-year floodplain, but to the 500-year floodplain. And that is specified in their ordinance. One thing I just want to mention as an example is we've had a couple of communities since I've been here, not very many, but I'm thinking of one in particular. They downloaded the draft model ordinance, and that's what it says, draft model ordinance. And then they took it to the town council, they put it through the public process, and they adopted it exactly that way. They didn't fill in the community's name. There's a blank spot for who you're going to specify as your floodplain administrator. It was still blank. We really admired their efforts and their get her done for us. But again, they went to all that effort and they didn't quite have it quite right. And, we could have helped them if they would have talked to us and let us know what they were up to. So just little things to keep in mind. You are allowed to edit and make that draft document specific to your community. Okay, getting into the floodplain ordinance and the regulations. There are 15 sections to the ordinance, so it's kind of an involved document. In section 1, it's going to talk about the title, the purpose, the authority, and just general provisions. Where do you get the authority to regulate floodplains? And, sometimes a disgruntled property owner might ask you that. What gives you the right? What gives you the right to tell me I need a permit? Well, that's in there, okay? It's also going to talk about oftentimes your subdivision regs have a little component that involve the floodplain. And then there's a few disclosure provisions in there too. These ordinance and regulations are going to be tied to your floodplain permitting process. And as you go through and you start processing permitting applications, you're going to hit that spot that says public notice must be given. Well, how many days do you need to run that public notice? It's going to be in your ordinance and in those regulations, okay? What can you do in the floodway? What's allowed? What's not allowed? That's in your regulations, okay? And you'll be able to go see that, but it ties to those permit applications. When you see what a property owner is trying to do with his project, and you're like, can he do this? I'll call Tracy and Shylea. Well, maybe, hopefully, as you get more experienced with things, you're going to be like, well, first I'll look at my ordinance. Then if I can't figure it out, I'll call Tracy, Shylea, or the Calvary, okay? This guide to Montana stream permitting is also available to help people. And what it really does is it's going through section by section. You know how there's 6 agencies that need to be involved in the stream permitting process in that joint application. It talks about each one of those and gives you more details. And there's a link to that on our website. And it's my understanding there's an updated version of this 2020, but they're having trouble finding it and getting it linked. There's a 2022 hard copy version running around, but they're having trouble finding the digital copy. So just be aware, there's 2 different books out there. When you're doing subdivision review, it's a good idea to look and, see where they're placing that subdivision. Is it involved in a floodplain? And then what are some of the the regs and the criteria that need to be applied to keep those structures and that development reasonably safe from flooding. Okay. Tracy, I wanted to ask this question of you before Gary got on, or, Gary was talking, but I didn't get a chance to. So I'm just going to ask it in front of the group. The regulated flood hazard area, in my mind, I mean, it's different, guys, than the special flood hazard area. The regulated flood hazard area is tied to some sort of identified flood-prone area, okay? Could be a map by the Soil Conservation Service, but it's something that the community will regulate too. Whereas your special flood hazard area is tied to the FEMA maps, the FIRM, the FIS. Is that correct, Tracy? That's how I think of it in my head.
It is, yeah. We have some communities that do have areas that have FEMA identified floodplains. We have a couple areas along the High Line that FEMA has identified their high-risk areas as approximate A, but the community actually has a more detailed study with elevations from NRCS. And so they use both those documents, or in the case of Madison County, where they don't have the FEMA maps yet, they're getting them, but they were utilizing the quad maps that they have identified based on elevation where their floodplain is. So they essentially have used their quad maps and looking at elevation lines to determine what essentially what they have like as an approximate A. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that communities could utilize some of these other tools. So you're absolutely right.
Okay. And I just kind of wanted to point out that difference because, maybe I'm a little, I'm not the sharpest crayon in the box, but, it took me a while to figure out. They wouldn't have named them differently, regulated flood hazard area or special flood hazard area, if there wasn't a difference and it didn't mean different things. But it took me a while to kind of figure out what, because oftentimes when you look at the technical definition of them, they're referring to the 1% flood, and that kind of stuff. And I wasn't picking up on the difference. And to me, that's the major difference, is one is tied to the FEMA approved maps and one is tied to, a different type of mapping that the community uses for regulating. And it could be that combination of both, like Tracy said. I think this disclosure provision is worth spending just a few minutes or a minute on. This says all property owners or their agents in the regulated flood hazard area shall notify potential buyers and their agents that such property, including any permitted uses that may be transferred, is subject to that regulation, that floodplain regulation. And if you've permitted it and there's criteria that goes with that permit, it's going to fall on the new property owner. And the seller should disclose that. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Tracy and I are dealing with something where, remember what was happening in 2020, 2021, 2022? Everybody wanted to move to rural areas, and they were often buying property sight unseen, and they were just buying off the internet. And now we have some individuals that bought property in the floodway, and Montana has higher standards, right? We don't allow new development in the floodway. And this gentleman bought a lot and didn't know it was in the floodway, and he's trying to develop that lot. And he's really upset that nobody disclosed to him it was in the floodway and he can't get a septic permit. So know that this disclosure provision is in there. They may, you can't make people do things, but they are supposed to follow it. And I think it's important for you guys to know that there is a disclosure provision if people are asking you about it. And where's it found? In section 1 of your floodplain ordinance. Section 1.17 talks about disaster and recovery. And I'll send out these slides and you guys can go through them too in more detail. Just because we're a little short on time. Section 2 goes over the definitions. And I think this is kind of an important section because if you're wondering about the wording or how it applies, this is where you're going to go find it. If you want to know what is suitable fill, there's the definition of suitable fill. Has to be stable, compacted, well graded, devoid of trash, tree stumps, or other organic material. Okay, there's your definitions if people are asking and you're wondering. Check that section 2. When FEMA and the state updated our state regulations, these are some of the things that were addressed. You know, elevated buildings, historic structures, our lomas and our clomas, a little bit more detailed definition of lowest floor and what does maintenance mean? Because you guys probably have all received a floodplain permit application where the person says, I'm going in to repair my stream bank, but it's just maintenance. And oftentimes, if it's true maintenance, they won't need a floodplain permit application, right? So that's why, you know, you've got to kind of sort that out and be like, is it really maintenance? Or are they doing something over and above that maybe requires permitting? So these are some of the things that the new ordinance addresses. And that's why we want to get these updates into your community. Because if this is what you regulate to, this is what your enforcement's on, you need to have these updates. And there's a little more detail. The big one is that substantial improvement too. That was a big update into the ordinance. In order to participate in the NFIP, again, communities must adopt these ordinance and regulations. We have a community that's getting new floodplain maps, a county, I should say. They're getting these new maps and they have a community within who's going to now be joining the NFIP for Montana. In addition to filling out the application to join, they're going to be adopting our current regulations, and that is a requirement and a criteria or they can't join. Just a quick question. If you guys were to answer this, in order to participate, local communities must adopt regulations that do what? That's right. Meet or exceed the federal standards, state and federal standards. Section 3 of your floodplain ordinance deals with what forms you use and fees that you can charge. Some of our communities have asked about that. Can I charge fees? This starts to get expensive, publishing things in the paper and giving public notice, or it's taking a lot of time for me to review this. Can there be a permitting fee? And that is discussed in section 3. It's kind of up to you guys, what you guys want to do, but Tracy always recommends, and what we would recommend, is that your fees should cover the cost of processing the application and definitely notifying those adjacent property owners. Section 4. This is why I wanted to make sure you guys had a good definition of what the regulated flood hazard area is, because this is what section 4 pertains to. Talks about those specific studies and maps used for regulating the flood plain. You'll see it is The acronym is RFHA, and it talks about and interprets the boundaries. And it gives you the authority to request additional information from the applicant. Here's those FEMA approved maps, your flood insurance study, and your firm. Have you guys, since you started this class, went and found your FIS? Have you looked at it and read through it? I always find it kind of interesting. If you have an older FIS, it talks about the flood history in your area. And sometimes when I'm talking to floodplain administrators, they're like, this guy keeps telling me it never floods here. Well, right there's a good place to go and look and be like, well, I'm sorry, it looks like it flooded in 1932, 1958, 1964, 1978. You know, there is a flood history. They just might not be aware of it. And they probably won't like you sharing it either, because they probably like their theory that it never floods. But at least you know different, and that's your job, right? Because what is your job? To be an expert on floodplain regulations and floodplain hazards for your community. That is your job. The floodplain maps are also called the flood insurance rate maps, and they identify the flood risk in your area. They're used for a lot of different purposes, and oftentimes you will use them for permitting. If a property is located inside that special flood hazard area, it's probably going to require permitting. And what else is it going to require? Likely it'll require insurance, right? And then remember, depending on your maps, you're going to have different levels of detail. And I'm going to show you just a couple of examples because I think it's always a good idea to review that. So we try to get away from using that 100-year flood. Or if we do, we want to make sure that people understand that it's not a flood that occurs once every 100 years. It's the 1% chance. So the 1% chance is considered a high-risk flood area for your community. And the other way I like to think about it is sometimes I think this really speaks to people and the hazard that they're in is over the lifetime of their 30-year mortgage, there's a 26% chance that flooding can occur. So sometimes that speaks to them too, if they're having trouble understanding that 1%. Now, just because it says 1% chance, does that mean it can't flood twice in the same year? We know that it does. Roundup had it happen in 2011, flooded them in May, and it flooded them really bad a week later. Fishtail, Montana, in June of 2022, it flooded. And it flooded again at Christmas time in December. There was an ice jam and it flooded for the second time in that community. So you can have multiple floods. And I've heard a lot of Jerry, if you guys were at AM/FM, the gal from Denver, she was talking about some of the communities in Louisiana getting hit, you know, within months of each other. So just remember, we've seen this before, and this is coming straight out of that quick guide. Okay, that nice illustration. And that's a great illustration sometimes to use when someone comes in your office and they're trying to understand, because you guys all know, just like I know, they use floodplain, floodway, flood fringe interchangeably. They think it all means the same thing. But we know that these have different designations, and especially in your ordinance, there's sections dedicated to what you can do in a floodway or what you can't do in the floodway and what you can do over there in the flood fringe. Okay. there's a detailed studied map. The detailed studied map is going to show you a defined floodway. It's going to show you that 1%, which is the zone AE in the, I call it blue. We have our 0.2% chance, or the 500 year, which is not so high risk, low to moderate risk in that orange area. Okay. And you'll see the little zones kind of outlined there in that detailed study. So there's the little definitions for you. There's the moderate risk area. And just remember, this should be reviewed to you guys. An approximate study, we have no BFEs, no flood profiles. That's very likely what your maps could look like. Those are paper maps, usually. They're not digitized. This is what happens when they take your paper map and they digitize it. They're often called DFIRMs, Digital Flood Insurance Rate Maps. Okay. Did they go and restudy the area? Is it a new updated mapping study with LiDAR? No, they just took that old map and they converted it to digital format.
Hey, Shylea.
Yep.
Hey, I just wanted to add just really quick. The reason that we're going over this information with the ordinance section is because there's a couple of reasons. With under FEMA with the CFR 60.3, there are the various types of risk, how risk areas are identified. So you have the zone A, and this is what Shylea is going over. And there's certain regulations that apply to each one of those different zones. Now, when we talk about the Montana floodplain model regulations, it's actually what they call a D level regulations, because we incorporate everything, and mainly that's based on how our state laws are written. So our state laws actually have development standards that are listed under floodway, but they also carry over to the flood fringe and areas that do not have base flood elevations, or like the approximate A's. So it's really important when you're talking about your ordinance, the map should be complete, they're tied to your ordinance, and the level of your ordinance is going to be based on what type of mappings within that community. So for Tom and Mackenzie and folks in Utah, I don't know, Mackenzie, do you guys have actually now since you guys have the V zones, you guys probably have 5 different kind of ordinances out there, possibly versions of like a model ordinance.
Yeah, we do. We have one for A, like for all the levels. So A, B, C, D, and E. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of point that out. And that's why kind of Shylea is going over this stuff, is because there's different requirements if you're in the zone A. And there's different requirements if you're in the floodway. And all of that is reflected in your ordinance as well. So sorry, Shylea, I just wanted to kind of point that out.
I knew that was the case. I probably wasn't making that clear enough. And I love that you did that, because I think it's important for these guys to understand. Because we're trying to help you guys prepare for the exam, but at the same time, we're trying to, you saw that big list in the beginning of all the things you have to do. Well, this also helps you prepare to do your job better. And that's what we're trying to do as well. So there's another example of an approximate A. Notice no floodway, no base flood elevations defined, just the map. Then we come along and we do a limited detail study. That may be what your community has. And if so, then they're going to have a BFEs, and there's going to be profiles and base flood elevations published in your flood insurance study. And this is an example of what this may look like. And I think Gary will attest to us that you are, these are the types of maps that you see often on the CFM exam. you're going to see those cross sections, and they may ask you questions about those cross sections and those elevations. So be familiar with that and make sure that that limited detail study or those detailed studies look familiar to you. This is what it looks like digitized. And then we have the final detailed study in which the floodway and the 500-year floodplains are published. And they're looking at the, you know, the 10-year and the 50-year and the 100-year and the 500-year discharges. Those have been looked at, and those types of analysis have been performed. So much more detail in here in this digitized detailed study for you guys. And again, you can go look at your flood insurance study. I think you guys should at least know it, or at least read through it once or twice. The ordinance, you should have that dog-eared and have little tags on it so that you can easily find things. So just a quick little learning check. What's it mean to be in a high-risk floodplain? What do you think it means? What's the practical application of it? I mean, we obviously know we're in the 1% 100-year floodplain, but it's also going to mean that the structures will need flood insurance, and you're going to require a floodplain permit for any development on that property. So in section 5 of your ordinance, it's going to talk about what's allowed in the regulated flood hazard area that you don't need to get a permit. So if someone comes in and says, hey, I'm going to do a project, this is what I'm thinking about doing, you guys can be like, oh, okay, well, maybe installing that mailbox over here, you know, you might not need it. But sometimes I'm going to say it's really a good idea to get it in writing from them, because they're going to come in and say, well, I was just going to do some tilling of my garden. And then you're going to be like, oh, you're okay, you don't need it. And then next thing you know, there's a backhoe out there and they're excavating, you know, and they're going to say, well, you said I didn't need it, because and you've heard Tracy say this, you know, sometimes their definition of a dock is not what you had in mind. So that's why sometimes it's good to just get it in writing, and then you have it documented. Well, this is what you were thinking about doing. This is what you told me you were doing. And then once you see it on paper, you can be like, oh, you don't need a permit for that. And they can keep it simple, but I kind of think that's a good idea. I think Tracy would agree.
Hey, Shylea,
Yes.
sorry, I was just going to point out that section 5 is actually unique to Montana. That is Montana state law. I mean, they worked with FEMA when they kind of came up with their state regulations as well back in the 70s to kind of go over like, hey, we don't require permits for this. But as Shylea was mentioning, when somebody's doing their lawn, we actually had a situation where when I first came to work for the state in early 2000, there was a surveyor in the community that was telling people to push their landscaping dirt up against their structure so that he can go in and actually say that their lowest adjacent grade was based on that kind of fill. So you got to really watch out on what people are doing and just have that line of communication. This is not giving them a carte blanche to do whatever they want. If they're gonna fill, if they're gonna grade, they're gonna excavate, they still have to get a permit. That's not exempting them from that. So just be careful on what they're doing, and definitely, like as Shylea said, make sure that they submit something to you in writing. But this is very unique to Montana.
Thanks, Tracy. Oops, gotta get back on there we go. And then here's where we're talking about like the recreational vehicles might be covered under this section. They have to be licensed and titled. These questions come up quite a bit. And the biggest thing you need to know is They're temporary. They're recreational vehicles used for camping, travel, maybe seasonal use, but they shouldn't be there more than 180 consecutive days. Okay. The reason being, if that flood or that impending disaster is coming, you can get those recreational vehicles out of the area. Section 6 talks about the prohibited uses. Notice this is in the floodway. Okay, here's what's allowed in the floodway and what it governs. So it's talking about mining of materials, railroads, highways, stream crossings. We get these questions quite a bit. The Montana MDOT is going to repave the highway. Do they need to get a permit? And, you know, you would look at that and, and be like, these are things that we would require permits on. And then these are things over here that maybe we would totally prohibit uses. You know, we're not going to let you build new residential structures. That's what that gentleman in that example I told you about earlier is upset about. He didn't know that. He didn't know he was going to be in the floodway. We're going to regulate those things. Of course, we don't want solid and hazardous waste in our floodways, or we don't want you storing toxic, flammable, hazardous materials. It becomes even a little questionable on your propane tanks. You know, how big? What are you doing? What about septic permits? Those kind of things. Section 7 talks about the permit application. And I think, where are we at on time? We are right at 10. So we didn't get as far as I truly hope to get. So what are you thinking we should do, Trace? Do we come back and visit this, or do I send this out? The next couple of sections just talk about, you know, section 8, which is going to tell you what you can and can't do in the flood fringe. And then sections 10 through 15 are pretty straightforward. Those are covered in like 2 slides.
We can add this on if everybody is amenable to kind of adding this, continue to add this into the other sections as well. We can just kind of chip away at kind of going through this.
I agree, because I think you guys have had a lot of, you know, discussion on how to do permitting. Do you agree, Trace, or someone
and there's
in the audience?
And there's specific information in unit. I think we were working off of unit 8, weren't we, Shylea, for the 480? I can't remember which one is specific. Unit 7. So we do want to kind of go over some of that information. So yeah, we can kind of cover that information here with, you know, with the next few sessions. We'll cover those units that we're looking at first, and then go back and start picking up on the ordinance stuff, if that's okay with everyone. Kind of keep
I think the biggest thing is section 7 tells you how to go about, you know, reviewing the permit. And then section 8 also discusses the evaluation of the permit, and it talks about who should be notified. That's where it's going to tell you, reach out to those adjoining property owners, and, you know, how many days do you have to post that public notice? Those kind of things. I just hope, if nothing else, this kind of prompts you to understand how your ordinances and your maps are tied together. The level of regulation in that ordinance is tied to how detailed your maps are. And it all will kind of regulate and guide how you do development and permitting in your communities. That's, I think, the basic thing for you guys to understand with all that, is it's all tied together. Any questions? Okay. With that, I'm going to tell you guys all to have a great weekend. And we'll see you guys next week.
Shylea, did you want to discuss anything more about the testing?
You know, Gary, I think we gave everybody a great place to start. You can always jump in. We'll kind of introduce it a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, I
at
was
a
just
time.
talking about between you and I, yeah, just
Oh.
you and I, or, in
No,
essence,
I just wanted you to know that if you needed more support from us,
Yeah.
we'd be happy to help you. But
yeah, no, I don't think, right at this point, I think I'm at it's like, I think I know what I'm doing.